Hey guys, this video will be discussing my first week impressions on Xiao, and will answer should you pull, and if so, how much. I plan on going about this discussion through advantages, disadvantages, then proceed to discussing constellations. I will refrain from discussing energy recharge extensively, and note extensively, as that would require another video on its own. However, I do leave my points regarding it. As for builds and weapons, many testing is still being done, so again, another topic in the future. Now that that is out of the way, let's get started. As for advantages, Xiao is a selfish main DPS. This means that although you are required to hyper-invest into one character, you don't necessarily need to invest so much into your supports as much as a quick swap team composition. In addition, Xiao has a low skill floor. A skill floor is a way of describing how difficult it is to begin the process of mastering how to play Xiao. So in this case, it's relatively easy to plunge spam or normal attack spam with Xiao, just like most DPS. Thus, in terms of playstyle, Xiao is friendly to the casual player. In terms of his skill floor, when not played at the most optimal level, Xiao gains mobility in exchange, as we are allowed to shave off some time in the air, traversing long distances. On the contrary, when going for perfect animation cancels, aka his skill ceiling, we restrict our movement in exchange for damage. It's a trade-off most players will come across, and at that point, his effectiveness becomes varied. Moving on, Xiao is a good enough main DPS for late game content at hyper investments, however struggles on certain floors such as 11.3.1 for Fatui agents or 12.1.2 at lower investments, and against the flying Anemo UFO. In terms of other specific benefits, he can bypass Minotaur's shields and shred Abyss Mage's shields at an average speed. He also competes with other carries, having good enough motion values per second at C0. Xiao is also a good unit for AoE, but with his plunge spam, he sometimes struggles when it comes to single target high HP enemies. Furthermore, Xiao is highly mobile and can chase down enemies in his burst with his E. Now for the important part, Xiao is extremely fun. In terms of his animations, his playstyle, and his overall character design, I believe miHoYo did a great job and I wouldn't change much about him aside from maybe his energy cost. Another advantage is that Xiao is an Anemo DPS, meaning that we can extend certain auras allowing us to play creatively. At the moment, several testing on different artifact builds are being done, such as 4VV, 4TS, 4TF, and 4 Lava Walkers, as we find new ways to unrestrict ourselves from the current gameplay. We will now move on to disadvantages. There's also the drawback of being a selfish main DPS, which is, when the rest of your team is hyper invested, you would be losing out damage at that point because you aren't able to utilize your team skill during the duration of Xiao's elemental burst. I'd also like to note, for the standard meta build, the 2-piece Gladiator set from the 2-piece Glads 2-piece for Descent Venerer may be somewhat difficult to farm, which means that we may hinder Xiao's overall performance and potential damage. However, this also means that you can use 2-piece or even no set bonuses at all and still do decent damage. In addition, although Xiao has a low skill floor, in order for you to compete with other top tier main DPS or on-field DPS, Xiao requires a high skill ceiling involving several animation cancels and proper environmental awareness. These animations include N1CJP, N1JP, and other normal attack and charge attack cancels. Although at first glance, performing this combo may seem easy, in practice it becomes very difficult to do so when you're doing your combo and you're interrupted by environmental factors. Thus the reason why we take into account environmental awareness. Next up, we also have the issue of our elemental burst uptime. I plan on covering this in a future video, but basically, depending on your Xiao's damage profiles, whether he is performing 10k plunges, 20k plunges, 40k plunges, and so on, the amount of builds we are restricted to either opens up or becomes very limited. But I will say this, just to sum up this point, he does have energy issues, although it can be fixed with either supports or several investments on different stats such as crit rate, crit damage for more HP threshold orbs, or energy recharge. I will add that Xiao is also very squishy. Although it may seem like he isn't for those who haven't played him, a simple explanation to why he is because in his jump and plunge animation, We can't really move side to side to dodge incoming attacks and projectiles, making us susceptible to damage unlike most grounded carries, where they can jump and dash from left to right, benefiting from the iframes or invulnerability period of it. Note, getting hit during our jump and plunge animation can reduce our damage significantly as we basically don't deal damage for that given time period, which is why having a shield support for knockback and damage resistance is very much appreciated. Also, due to how we need to move around after we land just because we don't necessarily get any movement if we optimize our plunge for damage, we would then be hitting significantly lower DPS as our gameplay slowly devolves into a non-ideal scenario we all hate to see. Similar to what I said in my previous video, since he doesn't benefit from melt or vaporize in terms of damage, he doesn't scale well as compared to other main DPS. Lastly, I don't see Xiao as F2P friendly. His best supports are locked through 4-star Constellation and 5-star units, notably C1 Sucrose, C1 Bennett, Zhongli, Albedo, and Jean. On the bright side, a well-invested Diona with Sacrificial, a thrilling Tales of the Dragon Slayer Barbara, Fischl, C6 Anemo Shred main character, although can be difficult to play around, are also decent options. My favorite among them are the first 3 mentioned as they help solve some of the issues Xiao faces directly, be it heals, interruptions, additional damage to meet certain damage profiles, and energy particles. However, I'd like to note that even if he does have a bad team, he still takes most of the field time and deals most of the damage. So the issue mainly comes to how the supports help him when he is on field. Overall, pulling for Xiao at C0, pull if you have the right supports, resources, and funding. Pull if you like his animations, playstyle, and if you need another DPS unit in your team that doesn't necessarily require a Xingqiu. At the end of the day, it's your decision if you want to pull for C0. If you don't hit any of these points, I wouldn't pull for him, and other DPS options could also work that are more friendly to your wallet. We will now move on to constellations. These are for the people who are probably thinking of going all in on Xiao or saving a couple wishes here and there for 4 stars in the Kutzing banner or potentially Hu Tao or Ayaka. I had to interview many dolphins and whales, so shout out to them providing their response in determining the constellation's power level. C1 Dissolution Eon, Destroyer of Worlds, increases lemniscatic wind cycling charges by 1. Overall, this constellation is the best among the first 5 constellations. However, it isn't game-changing and you need to hit certain requirements before you think about pulling him for C1. The advantages of C1 are, after several testing and going against what I said previously pre-release, is that C1 is good for energy at the beginning, not only because of the 2 to 3 extra Anemo particles, but because many people have expressed that C1 allows them to hit the HP threshold faster and thus get an elemental orb out of it. I'd also like to mention, generally, because we want to swap out to our battery, aka Sucrose after our burst, having C1 allows us to shave off 2 seconds minimum on a rotation, which is basically our swap time. Realistically, since we are able to have a freedom of our rotation here, so after our burst we can go into Bennett E or Q, into Sucrose double E into Xiao, the value of C1 increases as we are not locked into pressing E immediately after our burst. It also ensures that if we have one of our charges about to come online and we pop our burst, we don't necessarily need to worry about having maxed out charges anymore. The TLDR of that portion is that C1 is a huge quality of life constellation that makes our rotations extremely fluid. However, it isn't necessarily needed for Xiao to function. I'd recommend pulling for C1 if number 1, you have the resources to do so, number 2, if you have the supports that benefit from this fluid rotation, number 3, if you're happy with your current rotation and are not close to pity on the weapon banner, and number 4, if you want to triple dash in the overworld and brag to your friends, you can do so. Then by all means, you can go ahead. For weapons versus C1, the weapon gives more damage, however it's not always guaranteed unlike the character banner, so personally I stay away from it, but if you want to, you can wish at your own risk. For C1 against other characters based on leak information, so take this part with a grain of salt, Hu Tao's values are looking kinda strong, and her Japanese voice actor has so much personality that it's up to you at that point whether you want to pull her or not. So to sum that part up even more, It's the discussion between fluid gameplay versus more DPS, which is a high risk for the weapon banner, or new characters. For C2, Annihilation Eon, Blossom of Kaleidos. When in the party and not on the field, Xiao's energy recharge is increased by 25%. Now, similar to what I said previously in the other video, this constellation is overall bad. An extremely simple explanation of this would be, because Xiao is a selfish main DPS and we want to have him on the field as much as possible, the value of this constellation decreases accordingly. Now, there have been some reports that it's nice to have, but the general consensus from dolphins and whales are that it's not worth the money whatsoever. C3 and C5 overall are nice to have and are additional stats. C4, I asked the community whether C4 made a difference if they died or not for the most part, and they said that C4 does little to nothing when protecting Xiao from dying and doesn't act as a good enough safety net to protect Xiao when needed. His HP drain also continues and contributes to how the low value of this constellation is, because although we have increased defense, we are still losing HP regardless. So in the words of the Xiao dolphins and whales, it sucks. C6 Conqueror of Evils, Guardian Yaksha. While under the effect of Bane of All Evils, hitting at least 2 opponents with Xiao's plunging attack will immediately grant him 1 charge of 1 Lemnin Static when cycling, while ignoring its cooldown. A TLDR of this constellation would be, it's a situational massive damage boost that makes Xiao surpass Melt Ganyu by around 3 to 7% DPS based on Zakharov's calculations I cited previously. It changes Xiao's playstyle and is also pretty fun to see all skill-based characters in the game with basically no cooldown. It fits well with N1CJP, but overall doesn't really benefit against boss fights like Child or the new Vishap boss. Whales have also expressed that generally there is no third rotation of Xiao's burst because everything dies on the second rotation, and energy for 2+ enemy scenarios don't become a problem. So overall, you either aim for C0, C1, or C6, nothing in between. C1 if you meet the requirements listed, and C6 if you're a Giga Whale. Also, for those considering whaling on him, you can pull for my C1 for good luck as well. Now, that wraps it up. Make sure to like this video if this helps you, and subscribe for more Xiao content. I'll be posting more videos in the coming weeks, addressing many issues and providing several calculations. Thank you guys, and take care.